My name is Mason, and if there's one thing I've learned in 25 years of writing software, it's that a good idea is a dangerous thing to have. It's even more dangerous when your boss is a man like Cole. He told me I was being let go, that the company was moving in a new, more agile direction. He said it with a smile, so practiced it looked like it was part of the cheap corporate art on the wall behind him. He said my role, senior architect, was being made redundant. I was the one who built the digital nervous system that ran the entire company, the scaffolding that held up every single profitable transaction they'd made for the last decade. But in that sterile, airless conference room, with an HR rep looking at her tablet like she was timing an Olympic event, I was just a line item on a spreadsheet. Cole slid a thin folder across the polished table. He called it a generous severance package. I knew what it was. It was hush money. It was the price he thought my silence was worth, because a week before he had stood in front of the entire company on a stage with bright lights and a massive screen and unveiled his new flagship product, Nexus. He talked about synergy and market disruption. He used words like vision and innovation, and behind him on that screen was a perfect, elegant, beautiful design. My design, the project I had poured every late night, every weekend, every ounce of my professional soul into for the last 18 months. He stole it. He took the concept, the architecture, the very soul of the thing, and he put his name on it. He didn't just take credit, he erased me, and now he was cutting the final loose end, me. He probably thought I'd break, that I'd yell or plead. He'd seen it before, but I just looked at him, at the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead under the fluorescent lights, and I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. He had the patent, you see. He'd been working on it for months, behind my back, filing the paperwork to claim the broad, overarching concept as his own invention. He thought that piece of paper, that government seal, was a shield. He thought it made him king. He thinks he owns Nexus. In a way, he does. He owns the box. He just doesn't know that I own what's inside it. He doesn't know that while he was whining and dining patent lawyers, I was quietly, meticulously registering a copyright for the 10,000 lines of specific underlying source code as a literary work. He legally owns the idea of the car, but I own the blueprints for the engine, and he can't use a single line of my software, the very software that makes Nexus actually work, without my permission. My lawyer sent him the cease and desist letter an hour ago. It came with a licensing offer, a very simple one. It will cost him 80% of his profits. He doesn't know it yet, but he's not the company's great innovator. He's my first and most profitable customer. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or had your work stolen by someone with a better title and fewer ethics, then stick around. This is the story of how I took back what was mine. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories just like this one. The drive home from the office was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I remember every detail with a kind of hyper-clarity that only comes with profound shock. The gray, oppressive sky that looked like a sheet of unpolished steel. The way the worn leather on my steering wheel felt cool and smooth under my white-knuckled grip. The little box of my personal effects on the passenger seat. It wasn't much. A coffee mug my daughter painted for me years ago. A framed photo of my wife Sarah and me on our anniversary. A few well-worn programming manuals that were more like old friends than reference books, and a sad-looking desk plant that Alex, my closest colleague, had given me as a joke. I kept expecting the anger to hit me, a tidal wave of rage that would make me slam my fist on the dashboard or scream until my throat was raw. But it didn't come. Instead, there was just this hollow, ringing silence in my head, a vacuum where 25 years of loyalty and hard work used to be. The company wasn't just a job, it was a huge part of my identity. I'd started there when it was a scrappy startup in a cramped office that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ozone from the overworked servers. I was employee number 7. I'd watched it grow, helped it grow, from a handful of dreamers into a publicly traded corporation with hundreds of employees and a glass and steel tower downtown. I had written the code for our first ever product on a clunky beige computer in my spare bedroom. I had pulled all-nighters to fix catastrophic bugs, missed birthdays and anniversaries to meet deadlines, and invested more of myself into that company than was probably healthy or sane. And it had all been erased in a 10-minute meeting with a man who wouldn't know a line of C++ from a grocery list. When I got home, the house was empty. Sarah was at work. The kids were at school. The silence I'd felt in the car seemed to expand, filling every room. I walked into my home office, the place where I had conceived of Nexus, and I just stood there. The box of my belongings felt impossibly heavy. I set it down on the floor, next to my desk. I didn't unpack it. I couldn't. It felt too final, like a tombstone for a part of my life. I sank into my chair and just stared at the dual monitors on my desk, my personal setup, the command center, where the real work, the real creation had happened. This is where the memories started to flood in, not as a gentle stream, but as a breaking dam. It wasn't just about Nexus. It was about everything that came before it, the long, slow erosion of respect, the 1,000 little cuts that had led to this final gaping wound. I thought back to when Cole first arrived about 5 years ago. He was the board's golden boy, a hotshot MBA from a prestigious school with a resume full of buzzwords and a smile full of teeth. He was brought in as the new chief technology officer to modernize the company, to drive digital transformation. On his first day, he walked through the engineering department like a general reviewing troops. He didn't ask what we did, he told us how we were going to do it differently. He talked about disruptive innovation and synergistic frameworks. We, the engineers who had actually built the company's infrastructure, just exchanged tired glances. We'd seen his type before, all hat, no cattle. They come in, rearrange the furniture, slap new labels on everything, claim victory, and then move on to their next consulting gig, leaving the actual workers to clean up the mess. But Cole was different. He stayed. And he had a particular talent for identifying other people's good ideas and subtly, skillfully, making them his own. It started small. A clever optimization I'd developed to speed up our database queries was suddenly a strategic initiative he presented at a quarterly meeting. A workflow automation tool that Alex and I had prototyped over a weekend became the cornerstone of Cole's efficiency project. He was a master of corporate camouflage. He would listen in on our brainstorming sessions, nodding thoughtfully, asking just enough questions to sound intelligent. Then, a week later, our concepts would reappear in his PowerPoint presentations, polished and rebranded, with his name on the first slide. We all saw it. We'd mutter about it over lunch or in the break room. We called him the Magpie because of his penchant for stealing shiny things. But what could we do? He was management. He had the ear of the CEO and the board. Complaining would have been career suicide. It would have been dismissed as jealousy, as an inability to be a team player. So we just put our heads down and did the work. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. We thought that was our shield. As long as we were indispensable, we were safe. How wrong we were. The idea for Nexus was born out of frustration. Our core product was a complex logistics and supply chain management platform. It was powerful, but it was also a decade old. It was a monolith, a tangled web of legacy code I had helped write and had been patching and updating for years. It was reliable, but it was slow and inflexible. Our clients were starting to complain. They wanted more agility, better data visualization, mobile access. Cole's solution was to buy an off-the-shelf platform from a flashy startup and try to shoehorn our data into it. It was a disaster. The integration failed spectacular, costing us millions in consulting fees and nearly losing us our biggest client, a massive manufacturing firm called Sterling Automotive. I was the one who had to fly out to Detroit and spend a week in a conference room with their furious executives, personally reassuring them, walking them through the manual workarounds I'd devised to keep their supply chain from grinding to a halt. It was on the flight home from that trip, sketching on a cocktail napkin, that the architecture for Nexus first came into being, a modular, microservices-based system, flexible, scalable, and built from the ground up to be everything our old system wasn't. It wasn't just a new product, it was the future of the company. I worked on it in secret at first, on my own time, in this very office. I used my own computer, my own software licenses. I didn't want Cole's shadow falling over it until it was ready. I didn't want his buzzwords and his meddling to poison it before it had a chance to breathe. I built the foundational libraries first, the core components that would handle the most complex calculations. I named the main library Kerberos, after the three-headed hound of Greek mythology, because it had three primary functions: data ingestion, processing, and security. It was the most elegant piece of code I had ever written. It was clean, efficient, and beautiful in the way that only a programmer can truly appreciate. It was art, my art. When I finally had a working prototype, I showed it to Alex first. Alex is a brilliant database architect, a quiet, unassuming guy who has a gift for seeing the big picture. We went into a small, unused conference room, and I walked him through it on my laptop. He was silent for a long time, just staring at the screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he just looked at me and said, "Mason, this is it. This changes everything." His validation was all I needed. Together, we fleshed out the rest of the proposal. We built a presentation, created mock-ups, and prepared a full project plan. We were going to present it to the executive committee as a joint project, a solution from the engineering team to save the company from Cole's disastrous leadership. That was our mistake. We were too transparent. We followed the rules. We booked a meeting with Cole to show it to him first, as a professional courtesy. We thought maybe, just maybe, the sheer brilliance of the idea would be enough. He sat there in his ridiculously expensive suit, steepled his fingers, and listened. He had that same thoughtful, predatory look on his face. He asked a few questions, mostly about the potential market and profitability. He didn't ask a single technical question. When we were done, he just nodded slowly and said, "Interesting. Very ambitious. Leave the presentation with me. I need to run it through my strategic filters." We left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. He hadn't said no. He seemed to understand the potential. We were so naive. A week later, Cole called a code red meeting for the entire tech division. He stood on the stage, the one they usually reserved for all hands company announcements, and he started talking about a new secret project he had been personally incubating. He called it Nexus. And then he started showing our slides, my architecture diagrams, my mock-ups. He had just changed the color scheme and added his name to the title page. I remember sitting there in the audience, feeling the blood drain from my face. I could feel Alex's eyes on me. I couldn't even look at him. It was the most brazen, audacious act of intellectual theft I had ever witnessed. He presented our work as his own personal vision, and the room, full of people who didn't know any better, erupted in applause. He was a hero, and I was just a ghost in the machine he was now claiming to have built. That night I went home and I couldn't speak. Sarah knew something was wrong. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring into space. She sat down across from me, put her hand on mine, and just waited. Finally, I told her everything. The secret project, the presentation, the theft. I expected her to be as furious as I was, but she was calm. She listened patiently until I had gotten it all out, and then she asked a very simple question. "What are you going to do about it?" I didn't have an answer. I felt powerless. He was the CTO. I was just an engineer. It was his word against mine. Who would they believe? "They mistook your loyalty for stupidity, Mason," she said, her voice firm. "Don't you make the same mistake." That was the moment the hollow silence in my head began to be replaced by something else, a cold, hard resolve. She was right. I had been loyal to a fault, to a company that was no longer the one I had helped build. This wasn't about the company anymore. This was about Cole, and I was not going to let him get away with it. That was the night the catalyst fired. The despair turned to ice. The victim started thinking like a predator. The secret to my revenge, the ace I had up my sleeve, wasn't born of anger. It was born of foresight, a quiet, gnawing paranoia that had been my companion for years. Watching Cole operate was like watching a nature documentary about a cuckoo bird. He would find a nest, push out the original eggs, and lay his own, fooling the parent birds into raising his offspring. I had seen him do it to others, and I had a deep, unshakable feeling that someday he would come for my nest. This feeling wasn't something I could prove or articulate in a corporate setting. It was just a gut instinct, the kind you develop after decades of navigating office politics. It's a low hum of background radiation that tells you something is out of alignment. So I took precautions. The work I had done on Nexus, especially the core libraries like Kerberos, was done at home, on my own time, on my own hardware. This was a deliberate choice. I knew enough about corporate IP law to understand the concept of work for hire. Anything created on company time or with company resources automatically belongs to the company. It's a standard clause in every employment contract, including mine, but the lines can get blurry when the work is done outside of that context. I made sure to keep those lines as bright and clear as possible. I kept meticulous records, Git commits with timestamps logged from my home IP address, design documents created and saved on my personal cloud storage, with version histories that predated the official Project Nexus by months. I was building a fortress of evidence, brick by digital brick, without even knowing exactly what war I was preparing for. This was my first layer of defense. My second and far more critical layer was the copyright. This was the idea that came to me late one night, after Cole had appropriated another one of my team's smaller ideas. I was researching intellectual property, trying to understand the battlefield. Most people in tech think only about patents. Patents are for inventions, for processes, for functional concepts. They are broad, powerful, and expensive to obtain. Cole, with his MBA mindset, would naturally gravitate toward patents. He would see it as claiming territory, like a conquistador planting a flag. But I found something more elegant, more precise. Under U.S. law, software source code can be registered with the Copyright Office as a literary work. It's the same category as a novel or a book of poetry. It doesn't protect the general idea or the function of the software. That's what patents are for. It protects the specific written expression of that idea. It protects the lines of code themselves, the words, the sentences, the paragraphs of logic I had crafted. The distinction is subtle, but it is everything. Cole could patent the concept of a modular logistics platform. He could own the idea of a car, but the copyright meant that I, Mason, owned the literal 1,000-horsepower engine I had designed and built to make it run. He could describe it, he could sell it, but he couldn't actually use my specific high-performance engine without my permission. And without my engine, his car was just a hollow, useless shell. The beauty of it was its stealth. A patent application is a public affair. A copyright registration is a quiet, simple process. I went to the U.S. Copyright Office website, filled out the forms, paid the small fee with my own credit card, and uploaded a zip file containing the complete source code for Kerberos and the other foundational libraries. I didn't submit the entire Nexus application, just the core components that I had created on my own time, the parts that were uniquely, undeniably mine. The application was approved in a few weeks. I received a digital certificate, a simple PDF file that was now the most powerful weapon I possessed. I saved it in a secure, encrypted folder and told no one, not even Alex, not even Sarah. It was my secret, my insurance policy. I hoped I would never have to use it. After Cole's Grand Theft Auto of a presentation, I knew that day was coming. The first thing I did the day after I told Sarah was not to go to HR. It was to find a lawyer. I didn't want the company's recommended legal aid. I wanted a shark. I spent 2 days researching intellectual property lawyers in the city, reading reviews, looking at case histories. I found David Chen. His website was sparse and professional. He specialized in IP litigation for independent creators and software developers against large corporations. His biography said he was a former programmer himself before he went to law school. He understood both worlds. He was perfect. Our first meeting was in his small modern office downtown. It was all glass and brushed steel, a stark contrast to the stuffy, wood-paneled world of my former employer. David was younger than I expected, sharp and intense, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I was nervous. I felt like a fraud, like I was playing a game far above my pay grade. I started by laying it all out, the whole sordid story. The years of work, Cole's arrival, the secret development of Nexus, the theft, the presentation. I think I was rambling, my voice tight with a mixture of anger and anxiety. David just listened. He didn't interrupt. He just let me pour it all out. When I was finished, I felt exhausted. He was silent for a moment, just looking at me. Then he said, "Okay, Mason, I believe you. But belief doesn't win lawsuits. Evidence does. What do you have?" That was my cue. I opened my briefcase and took out my laptop. I had prepared everything. I showed him the Git repository with its meticulous time-stamped history of commits from my personal account, all dating from late nights and weekends. I showed him the design documents from my personal Google Drive with a version history that proved they were created months before Cole even knew the word Nexus. I walked him through the architecture of Kerberos, explaining why it was the indispensable heart of the system. I showed him the slides from my original presentation and the slides from Cole's presentation, highlighting the blatant copy-paste theft. He leaned in, his focus absolute. He was no longer just a lawyer. He was the programmer he used to be, reading the story written in the code. Finally, I opened the last file, the PDF, the Certificate of Copyright Registration for the source code of Kerberos and its related libraries, registered to Mason Reed, private citizen. I slid the laptop across the table to him. He stared at it, reading every line. A slow, thin smile spread across his face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just spotted a fatal weakness in its prey. He looked up at me. "Mason," he said, the respect in his voice palpable. "This is not a lawsuit. This is a hostage negotiation, and you're holding the king." He explained the legal landscape to me with crystal clarity. Cole's patent was likely valid, at least on the surface. He owned the concept, but the copyright gave me absolute control over the implementation of that concept. Without a license from me, any use of my copyrighted code, any compiling, any distribution, any sale, was an act of infringement. Each instance carried a statutory penalty of up to $150,000. Nexus was dead on arrival. Cole just didn't know it yet. "So what's the plan?" I asked, my heart pounding. David leaned back in his chair. "The plan is simple. We do nothing. We wait. We let him invest. We let him build his entire strategy around Nexus. We let him promise it to clients, to the board, to the world. We let him run up the mountain. And just when he's about to plant his flag at the summit, we're going to trigger an avalanche." While we waited, my other asset, my human asset, was providing invaluable intelligence. Alex was still on the inside, and he was my eyes and ears. He was disgusted by what Cole had done, but he agreed to stay, for now, to feed me information. Our communications were careful. We used encrypted messaging apps and spoke in code. He was watcher, I was architect. He told me how Cole was being celebrated. He'd been given a massive bonus. The company had launched a huge marketing campaign for Nexus, with ads in major trade publications. They were building a dedicated sales team. They were promising delivery to their top clients, including Sterling Automotive, within 6 months. They were, in essence, selling a product that they did not have the legal right to use. Alex also told me about the new development team. After I was fired, Cole had quickly hired a team of junior developers from a cheap outsourcing firm. Their job was to take his code and get it ready for production. Alex, as the lead database architect, had to work with them. It was, in his words, a complete circus. "They don't understand it, Mason," he told me in one of our secret chats. "They're looking at your Kerberos library like it's alien technology. The code is clean, it's commented, but the logic is, it's yours. It has your signature on it. It's dense. They're trying to treat it like a black box, just building things around it, but they keep breaking dependencies they don't even know exist. Cole just yells at them to work faster and be more agile. It's a mess. They think they can just brute force their way through it." This news was music to my ears. It confirmed my strategy. The code was not just a collection of functions. It was a reflection of my thought process, my 25 years of experience. It was a complex, interwoven tapestry, and they were trying to understand it by pulling at single threads, not realizing the whole thing was connected. Every dollar the company spent on marketing, every promise Cole made to the board, was just adding more weight to the scaffold he was building on my foundation. And I was about to kick that foundation out from under him. The waiting was the hardest part, but David was right. Every day that passed, our position got stronger and Cole's got more precarious. He was sprinting toward a cliff he couldn't see. The day of my firing was the final piece of the puzzle. The moment they walked me out the door, my employment contract was terminated. Any argument they might have tried to make about work for hire, however weak, became even weaker. I was a private citizen, and they were about to commit massive, willful copyright infringement using the work of that private citizen. David had a term for it. He called it a target-rich environment. A few weeks after my termination, Alex sent me the signal. It was a single message. They're demoing the beta for Sterling next Friday. That was it. That was the summit. They were about to make a legally binding promise to their biggest client based on a product built entirely on my stolen code. It was time to trigger the avalanche. I called David. "It's time," I said. His voice was calm, but I could hear the thrill of the hunt in it. "I'll have the letter on his desk by morning." The letter David Chen drafted was a work of art. It was not an angry tirade. It was cold, factual, and utterly brutal. It was delivered by courier to Cole's office first thing the next morning, with a copy sent simultaneously to the company's general counsel and every single member of the board of directors. I never saw the moment Cole opened it, but Alex painted a vivid picture for me later. He said an emergency, closed-door meeting was called with Cole, the head of legal, and the CEO. They were in the main boardroom for 3 hours. Alex's cubicle was close enough that he could hear the muffled sounds of shouting. Not productive, argumentative shouting. This was the sound of pure, undiluted panic. According to Alex, the first stage was denial. Cole apparently stormed into the meeting insisting it was a bluff, a desperate shakedown from a disgruntled ex-employee. He waved his patent certificate around like a talisman, insisting he owned Nexus. This, Alex guessed, lasted about as long as it took the general counsel, a sharp, older woman named Eleanor Vance, to read the first page of our letter. David had structured it perfectly. It began not with demands, but with facts. It listed my copyright registration number. It provided the date of my registration, which predated their patent filing by several months. It included a link to a secure online repository where David had uploaded a side-by-side comparison of my copyrighted Kerberos source code and the code their new team was currently using, with the identical lines highlighted. It was irrefutable. The second stage, as Alex pieced it together from the snippets of conversation he overheard and the frantic emails that followed, was panic. The demo for Sterling Automotive was less than a week away. The entire company's projected quarterly earnings were based on the successful launch of Nexus. The marketing department had already spent a fortune. They were legally and financially cornered. They couldn't deliver the product without infringing my copyright, and they couldn't not deliver it without defaulting on their promises and cratering their stock price. The final part of David's letter was the master stroke. It was the offer. It wasn't a threat of a lawsuit, not yet. It was presented as a business proposition. It stated that I, Mason Reed, as the sole owner of the copyright for the core operating software of the Nexus platform, was willing to offer them a temporary, non-exclusive license. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. The license would be valid for 1 year. The fee would be 80% of the net profits generated by the Nexus product line, payable quarterly. There was also a one-time setup fee of $250,000 payable immediately to cover my legal expenses and, as David put it, to focus their minds. And finally, it required a public statement to be approved by me, clarifying my role as the creator of the foundational source code. It wasn't just about money, it was about the truth. Alex told me Cole came out of that meeting looking like he had aged 10 years. His face was pale, his usual arrogant swagger completely gone. He walked back to his office without looking at anyone and slammed the door. The rest of the day, the executive floor was a hive of frantic activity. Suits I had never seen before, probably outside counsel, were seen rushing in and out of the boardroom. The atmosphere in the engineering department shifted from stressed to terrified. The junior developers on the Nexus team were told to stand down. They were, in effect, quarantined from the code, forbidden from touching it, while the lawyers tried to figure a way out. But there was no way out. They had built their house on my land, and the eviction notice had just been served. The first direct contact I had was an email from Eleanor Vance, the general counsel. It was polite, professional, and dripping with controlled desperation. She requested a meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial path forward. David handled the reply. He stated that our offer was clear, and that we were not interested in a meeting until the setup fee had been wired to his firm's trust account as a sign of good faith. The silence that followed that email was the loudest thing I had ever heard. For 48 hours, nothing. I started to get nervous. Were they calling my bluff? Were they going to try to fight it, to bury me in legal fees? David was unconcerned. "They're not fighting, Mason," he told me over the phone. "They're grieving. They're cycling through the 5 stages of corporate death: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Right now, they're probably somewhere between bargaining and depression. Acceptance will come when they look at their bank account." He was right. On the 3rd day, I got a notification from David. The $250,000 had been wired. It was real. I remember just staring at the email, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes. It wasn't even about the money itself. It was the first tangible proof that I had won. It was the sound of the enemy's shield cracking. The next call was not from a lawyer. It was from Cole. He called my personal cell phone in the evening. His number flashed on the screen, and my heart hammered against my ribs. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice as calm and even as I could make it. His voice was completely different from the one I remembered. The booming, confident baritone was gone. It was thin, strained. "Mason, it's Cole." He paused, as if expecting me to say something. I stayed silent. "Listen," he started. "I think there's been a massive misunderstanding here." I almost laughed. "A misunderstanding?" "I don't think there has, Cole," I said, my voice a flat line. The letter was quite clear. He started to babble, a frantic, incoherent stream of words about teamwork, about shared vision, about how he had always seen me as a key partner. He was trying to rewrite history, right there on the phone. He was trying to manipulate me, to appeal to the company man he thought I still was. It was pathetic. Then his tone shifted. The pleading vanished, replaced by a flash of the old arrogant Cole. "You can't do this, Mason. The company will be ruined. You'll be destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of people, all because of your ego." It was a classic manipulation tactic. Make it my fault. Frame my defense of my own work as a selfish act of destruction. But it didn't work. Not anymore. "No, Cole," I said, the coldness in my voice surprising even me. "You did this. You did this when you put your name on my work. You did this when you lied to the board. You did this when you thought I was too old, too stupid, or too scared to fight back. The consequences are yours, not mine. My offer stands. 80%. Have your lawyers contact my lawyer. Do not call this number again." And I hung up. I stood there in my office, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a battle finally met and won. The silent takeover was complete. The king was in checkmate. All that was left was to watch him topple. The first tremor of the real earthquake came a week later, and it started with Alex. He called me, not on our secure app, but on a regular line. "I'm out, Mason," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I just walked out of my exit interview. I told them exactly why I was leaving. I told them I couldn't work for a leadership team that operates on theft and deceit. He was the first. He was a senior architect, respected and vital to their database operations. His departure left a huge hole. But it was more than that. It was a signal. The rats, as they say, are always the first to leave a sinking ship. But in this case, the rats were the most talented and experienced engineers in the company. Within 2 weeks, the talent exodus was no longer a tremor. It was a full-blown crisis for the company. Two of the other senior developers, guys I had worked with for over a decade, resigned on the same day. Then a lead quality assurance engineer, then the head of network infrastructure. These weren't the junior developers Cole had hired. These were the veterans, the institutional knowledge of the company. They were the people who knew where the digital bodies were buried because they had helped bury them. They didn't all come to me. Some retired, some went to competitors. But their reasons were all the same. They had seen what the company had become under Cole. My situation was just the final ugly confirmation of a culture they no longer wanted to be a part of. Competence isn't cheap, and it's certainly not loyal to incompetence. Cole and the board were in full-blown panic mode. Alex, before he left, had forwarded me an internal memo. It was a desperate attempt at damage control, announcing a new employee retention bonus and a renewed commitment to our core values of integrity and respect. It was so transparently false that it became a running joke among the departing staff. The company was hemorrhaging talent, and all Cole could do was throw money at the problem, not realizing the wound was one of trust, not compensation. This was when Cole tried his last desperate counter-manipulation. He must have convinced the board to make one final desperate play. I received another official-looking letter, this time not from the general counsel, but from the CEO himself. It was a formal offer, not a licensing deal, an acquisition. They offered to buy my copyrighted assets outright. The offer was for $1 million. It was a lot of money. A year ago, it would have been a life-changing number, but now it was an insult. David and I had run the numbers. Based on the company's own sales projections for Nexus, my 80% licensing deal was worth at least 5 times that in the first 2 years alone. The offer was a trap, and a clumsy one at that. They wanted to buy my leverage, to own the engine so they could throw me away for good. They weren't offering me a partnership. They were offering to buy the gun I was holding to their heads. But there was another, more insidious part of the offer. It came with a thick stack of additional documents, a non-disclosure agreement that would have silenced me forever, and a non-compete clause so broad it would have effectively barred me from working in the software industry on the entire continent for 10 years. They weren't just trying to buy my code, they were trying to buy my future. I felt a flash of real anger then. Even in defeat, their arrogance was boundless. They still saw me as a problem to be managed, a threat to be neutralized, not a creator to be respected. David drafted our response. It was very short. It simply said, "We reject your offer. The terms of our original licensing proposal remain on the table. The deadline for acceptance is Friday at 5 p.m. After that, we will be filing a lawsuit for copyright infringement and seeking maximum statutory damages." We sent it back and waited. The power shift was complete. I was no longer the one waiting by the phone. They were. The final confrontation wasn't what I expected. I had imagined a dramatic boardroom showdown, a scene worthy of a movie, but the end, when it came, was much quieter, much more pathetic. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the day before our deadline. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. It was Eleanor Vance, the general counsel. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of unconditional surrender. "Mr. Reed," she said, the formality a stark admission of my new status. "This call is to inform you that the board of directors has voted to accept the terms of your licensing agreement. The contract is being drafted by our team and will be sent to Mr. Chen for review by end of day." I just said, "Thank you, Eleanor. I look forward to seeing it." There was a pause on the line. Then she added, her voice dropping slightly, "For what it's worth, Mason. Some of us knew what he was. We were just too slow to act. I'm sorry." And she hung up. It wasn't an apology that could undo the damage, but it was an acknowledgement. It was the truth, finally breaking the surface. The contract arrived an hour later. It was exactly what we had asked for, 80% of net profits. The public statement of my authorship, the immediate payment of our fee. There were no tricks, no hidden clauses. They were beaten. David reviewed it, we signed it, and sent it back. It was done. I had won, but the true vindication came the next morning. I was in my home office, brewing a cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed with a news alert from a major tech industry journal. The headline was stark: CTO Cole Matthews resigns from company name amidst product launch controversy. I clicked the link. The article was brutal. It detailed his abrupt departure for personal reasons, but the subtext was clear. It quoted anonymous sources from within the company who spoke of a crisis of leadership and significant intellectual property disputes surrounding their new flagship product, Nexus. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. The story was out. His reputation was ruined. And then, the article mentioned the new public filing from the company, the one my contract had mandated. It stated that while the company held the patent for the Nexus platform, the core operating source code was created by and licensed from a third-party developer, Mr. Mason Reed. It was there in black and white for the whole industry to see. My name, my creation, my vindication. It wasn't just a win, it was a restoration. They hadn't just paid me, they had been forced to tell the truth. My phone started ringing. The first call was from Alex, laughing so hard he could barely speak. The next was from a former colleague, congratulating me. Then a recruiter from a major competitor. Then the biggest call of all. It was from the VP of Technology at Sterling Automotive, our former biggest client. He'd seen the news. "Mason," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "I had a feeling something was wrong over there. The Mason Reed I know doesn't build things that break. Listen, we're pulling our contract, but we still need a solution, and I'd rather work with the man who built the engine than the salesman who tried to steal the car. Are you taking on new clients?" I looked around my quiet home office, at the picture of my family, at the coffee maker bubbling away, at the sun streaming through the window. This wasn't the corner office in the glass tower I once thought I wanted. This was something better. This was freedom. "Yes," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "Yes, I am." The new workplace reality wasn't about getting my old job back. It was about creating a new one, on my own terms, where competence was the only currency that mattered. So what's the moral of the story? It's not just about getting revenge. It's about understanding your own value, especially when the people who are supposed to recognize it don't. For years, I was the loyal company man. I believed that if I just worked hard, kept my head down, and produced good results, I would be rewarded. I tied my worth to my job title, to the name of the company on my business card. That was my mistake. My value wasn't in my position as senior architect. It was in my mind. It was in the 25 years of experience that allowed me to see a solution no one else could. It was in the skill that allowed me to build it. Cole and the company, they didn't steal a product. They tried to steal a person's life's work, and they fundamentally misunderstood what that work actually was. They thought it was an asset they could list on a balance sheet. They didn't understand that the code was just a byproduct. The real asset was the creator. They thought they could just fire me and slot in some cheaper, younger version. They learned the hard way that you can't just replace experience. You can't just buy institutional knowledge. And you can't build a future on a foundation of lies. They mistook my loyalty for weakness and my quiet competence for a lack of ambition. In the end, they didn't just lose a product. They lost their integrity, their best people, and their biggest client. And me, I didn't just win a settlement. I won my name back. I reclaimed my own narrative. My new consulting firm is thriving. I have a handful of clients, including Sterling, and a small dedicated team made up of some of the best people who left the old company, including Alex. We're building new things, better things, in an environment built on mutual respect, not fear. I work fewer hours, I make more money, and for the first time in a long time, I love what I do again. The greatest victory wasn't the money. It was the quiet satisfaction of proving them wrong, of watching an arrogant system collapse under the weight of its own incompetence. So if you're out there feeling undervalued, watching someone else take credit for your ideas, don't just get angry. Get smart. Understand your leverage. Document everything. Know your rights. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most power. They just haven't decided to use it yet. Your skills, your experience, your integrity, that is your real capital. don't ever let anyone take that away from you. Because in the end, competence is a hell of an asset, and arrogance is a liability you can't afford. Thanks for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. I read them all. Take care of yourselves and know your worth.